Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. We're looking at the Foundations commanders, and today it's Tithe Extractor. The Rev is a mono-black commander. She's a 4-mana, 3/3 human rogue. She says, whenever you attack, target creature gains Death Touch until end of turn, and whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token, then look at the top card of that player's library and exile it face down. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. So this ability is sort of a combination between Grim Hireling and any of the hit your opponent and draw cards type cards that we have, such as Gix, for example. So importantly, it's not per creature, it's per opponent being attacked. So the maximum amount that we can get out of this is 3 treasures and 3 exiled cards based on attacking all 3 of our opponents, or more if you're playing in a pod with more than 4 total players. So obviously we want to go wide, and in particular we want creatures that have evasion. It's also worth noting right off the bat that there's very little that we can do with this Death Touch trigger in mono black. Basically, the only real card that cares about something like this is something like Walking Ballista, and there's really not much more, because most of the pinging type creatures are in red and not black. So with that said, we do have Walking Ballista, and after playing Walking Ballista, it's easy enough to just slot Mikaeus the Unhallowed into the deck as a way of comboing with Walking Ballista. Simply put, you remove all the counters on Walking Ballista to ping your opponents. Walking Ballista has Undying, and you've now removed the final counter from it, so Mikaeus returns it to the battlefield with a counter on it. You remove the counter, ping another opponent, it dies, it comes back because it didn't have a counter on it, and you can repeat infinitely. And then, of course, Bolas' Citadel, which is always just a great source of card advantage in black decks. It's easy enough to slot in Aetherflux Reservoir and Sensei's Divining Top as another way to combo with those. We also have our card draw spells here, in particular Necros and Gix. And of course, as we'll see later, we're going to have lots of cheap X1 creatures, so Skull Clamp in particular becomes really good. So now let's talk about our evaders. So here are a ton of 1-mana evaders, and these are basically creatures that they don't really do much. They have abilities that don't really matter too much. They're just here because they're 1-mana creatures that have flying, or that just straight up can't be blocked, or that have fear. And these are just here as ways so that when we cast our commander, we can attack our opponents and probably not have any of these creatures get blocked and generate treasures and cards off of them. So in that regard, it's very similar to a commander like Tymna or Gix, except it costs 1 more, but it also generates treasures for you. We also have a little bit of fast mana here, because the faster we can get our commander out, the better. We also want to make sure our commander doesn't get killed, so something like Lightning Greaves is important. Our lands are fairly straightforward. We've got the Coffer stuff here and Shizos, and sometimes we'll want other creatures that don't naturally have evasion to have evasion, and it doesn't really cost us much to just swap one of these swamps with Shizo. We also have fetch lands because we've got Bolas' Citadel, and we might want to change the top card of our library. And finally, Vault of Whispers is here so that we've got another artifact for Mox Opal. Then we've got our protection spells. Again, we want to make sure that our commander does not get killed or countered. Therefore, Hand Disruption is going to come in handy. And in particular, the creatures that disrupt hands and that also have flying, so Deep Cavern Bat and Kitesail Freebooter, since those accomplish both of those goals. We've got a bunch of ramp, since of course we do want to get our commander out. And in particular, we're shifting our ramp towards creatures as much as possible. So things like, Monakin and Plaguemur and whatnot, since sometimes we'll be able to attack with these creatures and also trigger our commander. Not most of the time, but sometimes. We also have Grim Hireling over here because, of course, why not? It's kind of doing the same thing as our commander. Bunch of removal, and in particular, edicts that hit all opponents. So again, it's important that we be able to attack through all of our opponents. So any removal that can hit multiple creatures, although it's not great that it isn't targeted and that our opponents can pick their worst creature and sack that, these at least help in regards to clearing out the board. But of course, we do also need targeted removal for certain cards, like Duraneth Magistrate, for example. So we do have targeted removal, and we have removal that can hit enchantments in case we need to do that. We've got some stax pieces, and in particular, I want to highlight Chains of Mephistopheles. So this is a whole bunch of text, but what this basically says is that nobody can draw extra cards. Now, you might think that that's detrimental for us, and it is detrimental for some things, like Necrodominance and Skull Clamp, for example, and Gix are all cards that draw more cards. But we also have cards that don't actually draw cards, things like Necropotence and Bolas' Citadel, and in particular, our commander is a card advantage engine in the command zone that also technically doesn't draw cards. It exiles them out of our opponent's libraries. So this card, while it does affect us to some degree, it mostly hurts our opponents a lot more than it hurts us. But with all that said, that is going to do it for Tithe Extractor in EDH.